because that property that's got 6 tenants should be making at least £1,000 profit per month, whereas a single-let might be making £100, maybe £200 profit. And not only do you get more rents, you get less void periods, so you make a lot more money overall. Now, what you wouldn't want to do is buy a property hoping to get planning permission. What you'd probably do is control it with a lease option and then actually get the planning, and then once you've got the planning in place, then you can buy that property. But when you have a high-end co-living HMO, people are really coming into a community. The value of the property has gone up so much, they can actually borrow money based on the value rather than the purchase price. So you can absolutely pick up properties in an Article 4 area and still use them at HMOs as long as you follow the rules. Hello and welcome to the Property Magic Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be busting some of the myths about one of my favorite strategies, which is houses of multiple occupation, otherwise known as HMOs. And this is a really important video, particularly if you're not doing HMOs yet, because maybe some of these myths have prevented you from using this very profitable strategy. And this is actually part 1 of a 2-part mini-series all about HMOs. So what are the 6 big myths about HMOs? The first one is people often say to me, oh yeah, but everybody is doing HMOs. And the reality is that's not correct. 82% of rental properties in the UK are single-let properties. Now, it might be that in your environment, if you go to network meetings, if you go to property training, you might meet lots of people there who are interested in or actually doing HMOs because they've been educated to understand that HMOs are a very profitable strategy that you should be doing as part of your balanced portfolio. And because of that, you might think that everyone you know is doing HMOs, but I promise you that is definitely not the case. Now that's linked actually to the second myth. People say that there is an oversupply of HMOs. And actually that's partly correct because there is an oversupply of very average HMOs. But when we teach you to do HMOs, you should not do average HMOs. I teach you about doing very high-end co-living HMOs. What's the difference? Well, an HMO, maybe someone has a room in a house, but when you have a high-end co-living HMO, people are really coming into a community. They like living with other people. They don't want to be cooking in their own room. They want to be in this community, sometimes even shopping with housemates and cooking together or taking in turns to cook. And this is where you get this real community, where these people become great friends, not just people living in the same property. And what you get when you get this co-living community is you get the environment where people, they don't want to leave. So you actually have lower void periods. And also it's important to note that when you have a high-end HMO, you're not competing on price. You see, if there are lots of average HMOs, what most HMO landlords do that have just very boring vanilla HMOs is they will lower the price to bring tenants in if they have void periods. With a high-end co-living HMO, actually you charge a higher rent because it's better standard accommodation. You're looking for those discerning tenants who are prepared to pay more. And not only do you get more rents, you get less void periods, so you make a lot more money overall. And so this is why if you're going to do HMOs, please do not do standard HMOs. They must be high-end co-living HMOs, and there's always a demand in good areas for those kind of properties. The third big myth about HMOs is that they're a lot more work and a lot more hassle. And again, to a point, I would agree with that. One HMO that's maybe got 6 tenants is obviously going to be more work than one single let property that's got just 1 tenant. However, it's not really a fair comparison because that property that's got 6 tenants should be making at least £1,000 profit per month, whereas a single let might be making £100, maybe £200 profit. So if you compared maybe 5 single-let properties that might be different locations around the town or city, compared to the amount of time and effort you put into one 5 or 6 bed HMO, I would suggest the one HMO actually is a less time input. So actually, if you're comparing a like-by-like basis, I would argue that it's not more work doing one HMO than it is maybe 5 single-lets. And the other point is, because there's so much profit, you can actually afford to get someone else to manage it for you. Now you need to understand that most normal letting agents don't know how to run HMOs. And if you actually go and ask them, is there demand in the area? They'll say, no, there isn't demand. That's because they don't know, because they don't rent them out. And you can go onto websites like spareroom.co.uk, which is the biggest website that we as landlords use to advertise our HMOs, and check in your area, is there demand in the area? And if you live in a city or a big town, there are going to be people who want to live in HMOs. Now, the next big myth, myth number 4, is that you need to have lots of money to do HMOs. And my answer to that is, well, it kind of depends on your strategy. If you're buying a house that needs a full back-to-brick refurb, yes, that's going to require lots of money. You've got to have the money to buy the property, you've got to have the money to do the refurb, which might be £100,000 to do a big refurb. But when you do a BRRR, so buy, refurbish, refinance, rent and repeat, you buy below market value, you refurbish that property, adding significant value, and then based on the higher value, you refinance to take some or all of your money out. You can then use that money to go and do the same thing again. So you can rinse and repeat and recycle your deposit. If you're doing that, yes, it's going to be a big amount of cash. But there are some strategies where you don't need to do that. For example, there are lots of landlords who are retiring, or maybe they're just tired. They really don't want the hassle of running their HMO themselves. They're self-managing rather than using an agent. And very often those properties, they're not in the best condition. They're not charging the full rent. So you can come in and do a very light refurb on those properties and significantly increase the value of the property and also the rental income. So you could buy those properties, you could acquire them on a rent-to-rent basis where you're just renting it for 3 to 5 years from the owner, or even better, you could do a purchase lease option where you rent it for 3 to 5 years and then you've also got the right to buy that property in the future if you want to buy that. Now, quite a few of my students, when using purchase lease options in conjunction with HMOs, the value of the property has gone up so much they can actually borrow money based on the value rather than the purchase price, and they've been able to buy properties that have been on purchase lease options with none of their money required at all. Or the final thing you can do is strategies such as vendor finance. This is where a seller wants to get rid of their property. They don't need all the money now, and they can actually help fund the deposit for that property. Or they might even give you a 100% mortgage on the property if there's no mortgage in the first place. These are obviously more advanced strategies which you need to learn about, but please don't think you have to have a lot of money to do HMOs. And final point around this is that because there's so much profit, maybe you can go out and find private investors or joint venture partners who will lend you the money to do the work, and then you share some of the profits with them. So when you know how to do this, because they're very profitable, there are lots of people who would love to share some of your profit. So you really do not need to have a lot of money to do HMOs if you know what you're doing. Myth number 5 is that you can't do HMOs in areas that are known as Article 4. Now, what is Article 4? Well, in most parts of the country, if you want to take a normal residential property, which is a C3 planning classification, you can take that and convert it into a C4, which is an HMO for up to 6 people, and you do not need to apply for planning permission. You have permitted development rights. However, in many cities, the local council has decided they've got too many HMOs and they've applied the Article 4 direction. What that means is they've removed those permitted development rights. So within an Article 4 area, you absolutely would need planning permission to take a normal C3 house and convert it into a C4 up to 6 people HMO. And so people often think, well, the councils are never going to grant permission, so you can't do that in an Article 4 area. Well, that's not actually correct. As long as you meet the planning conditions. So normally the council say something like, as long as there's no more than 20% HMOs within a certain radius, maybe 100 metres, then as long as you tick all the boxes, you will be able to get planning permission. Now, normally they will refuse planning permission on the first application because they don't want more HMOs. But when you go back to appeal, if you meet all their own criteria, you might well get your planning permission granted. Now, what you wouldn't want to do is buy a property hoping to get planning permission. What you'd probably do is control it with a lease option and then actually get the planning, and then once you've got the planning in place, then you can buy that property. So that's the approach you use if you want to take a normal house and convert it into up to 6-bed HMO. But there's also another strategy you can use if you're looking in an Article 4 area, and that is buying an existing licensed HMO from a landlord who just doesn't want that property anymore. As long as the property has been used as an HMO from before Article 4 direction was brought in and being used continuously as an HMO since it's been brought, and you can evidence that, you will be able to apply with the landlord for what's called a certificate of lawfulness. And that's really important, because if you're looking to buy an HMO and get a mortgage and it's in an Article 4 area, the mortgage company will either want to see the planning permission or they'll want to see the certificate of lawfulness, otherwise you will not be able to get finance. So you can absolutely pick up properties in an Article 4 area and still use them as HMOs as long as you follow the rules. And the final myth, myth number 6 that I want to bust, is people get very worried about licenses. They say, I'm not sure if I will be granted a license on this HMO. Well, what you need to understand is they obviously look at the landlord, they want you to be a fit and proper person. So as long as you haven't had convictions for drug offences, as long as you haven't had prosecutions for being a bad landlord before, then in theory you're a fit and proper person. And then as long as the property meets all of the required standards, such as the minimum room sizes, such as the safety requirements. So getting a license is just a tick box exercise. Of course, you need to reach out to the local council, get the guidelines from them to make sure you're doing everything you need to do. But as long as you follow those guidelines and you adhere to all the suggestions, then you should be able to get your HMO license, which typically lasts 5 years. And you can either have a license in the name of the owner, or if you don't own the property, you're doing a rent-to-rent or a lease option, you can get it in the name of the manager instead. And then when you come to buy the property, then you put the license into your own name. Now, this whole idea about licensing and planning, most investors get completely confused about it. So I'm actually going to do in the next episode, in part 2 of this 2-part series, I'm going to help you understand everything you need to know about HMO licensing and HMO planning, but that's going to be in the next episode of the Property Magic podcast. In the meantime, I do hope you found this useful and realize actually when you know what you're doing an HMO is not as scary as you might think. Now, you do need to have a bit of knowledge and education, and actually I am running a 90-minute online training where I'm going to give you a lot more detail, give you a lot more case studies to understand exactly how you can add this highly profitable strategy to your portfolio. So if you want to do that, in the show notes or below this video, there's going to be a link. You can come and join me on that 90-minute online training, and I highly recommend you do so to really open your mind and understand the possibilities with HMOs. And if you like this video, come and like the video, and also make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified anytime we come out with a new video. Until next week, when I'm going to share with you the planning and licensing considerations, as ever, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.